Just what do we know now that we did not know before the tragic death and gunshot wound on the movie set Rust? Well, we're going to tell you what we know now that we did not know before. We're going to tell you about that on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. Yep, it's what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show, and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome aboard the Charlie Crime Train today. We're going to get a couple of housekeeping things out of the way real quick. Then we'll get right into our focus on Part 4, Alec Baldwin and the Rust incident and the trial that has just wrapped up this past week. We're going to tell you all about that on today's episode. But right now, I'd like to take a moment to say welcome to all the new listeners. Every week, we have brand new listeners, and it just thrills us that we have more and more people joining the Charlie Crime Train. In fact, I got to tell you, the thousands of downloads, it just humbles us. Thank you so much for being a part of our podcast. Hey, by the way, I'd like to invite you to reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. You might have questions. You might have suggestions. You may even want to disagree with some of the things and the premises that we put forth. It is a safe zone. You're welcome to do so. And if you'd like to support the program, go over to peacemakernetwork.com. That's peacemakernetwork.com. You can become a part of the Charlie family by becoming a badge, BADGE supporter for as little as $3 a month. You can not only help the podcast, but you can help us help the brave men and women. Those brave people who run toward danger instead of away from danger. We're talking, of course, about law enforcement, first responders, and, of course, our brave men and women of the military. You can read all about that, peacemakernetwork.com. Then, if you'd like to get caught up on any of the series or any of the podcasts, we have hundreds of them out there. We invite you to go to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. Don't worry about remembering all that, because, of course, we have those links. Yep, right there in the show notes. All you got to do is just reach down there, click on them, and you can get to either an email to me, reach out with a shout-out, or you can go on over to peacemakernetwork.com, or you can go to charliecrimebuster.com. We'll make it all there in a neat little package for you. So thank you again. Hey, I'd love to hear what you think about this case. You know, there's a lot of questions here as far as to the blame of this terrible tragedy where this young lady lost her life. Another person was wounded. Did not have to happen. We all know that. But who should get the blame for that? Well, we're going to talk all about that in today's program as we get right into the focus of today's podcast. So on today's podcast, I'm going to tell you what we know now that we did not know before this tragic death and, of course, this trial. Of course, the one thing that you could not know. Now, you could have speculated it. Yeah, you could have speculated. You could have even predicted it. You could even imagined it, but you could not have absolutely known. What is it that you could not have known, and that we know now that we did not know then? Well, it's very simple. Now we know what the jury had to say regarding the guilt of Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. That's the armorer on the set. We know now that we could not have known before, that she was found guilty. That's right. The jury came out and they said it is guilty. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the Rust film armorer. She was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter Wednesday in a New Mexico trial. Of course, this again was stemming from the 2021 fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, who was actually killed by a live round of ammunition fired from the prop gun. And that weapon was held by actor Alec Baldwin. And there was another director, Suze, he was wounded. Now, Gutierrez-Reed, who was responsible for the firearm safety and storage on the movie set, well, she was, now get this, she was acquitted of the separate charge of tampering with evidence. That one was brought by the prosecutors. I had filled you in on that charge. That was where it was alleged that she had transferred a small bag of cocaine to someone else after the popo showed up at the set there on October the 21st, 2021. You see, now remember, this was thrown in at the last minute. It was evidence. Regarding that allegation, well, that evidence was sketchy at least, and so she did skate on that charge. However, the jury, it appeared to have made up their mind because they deliberated for only 3 hours Wednesday, before reaching a decision. And that 26-year-old, she was 24 years of age, of course, when this happened, 26 now, she did not take the stand in her defense during the trial in Santa Fe. And according to those in the courtroom, she did not show any emotion when the verdict was read. She was then taken into custody. Now, in case you would like to know, that involuntary manslaughter charge, it carries up to 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. As of now, the judge has not, he has not yet set that sentencing date, as we are now recording this particular podcast. Now, Gutierrez-Reed, by the way, is the very first person to stand trial in a case that has highlighted the movie's industry safety standards, and particularly the specific sets of violations of them. And, hey, my friend, prosecutors are not finished fighting for justice in this case. In fact, attorneys representing Hutchins' parents and sister, well, they said they were satisfied with the jury's verdict. That's what the attorneys said in the release. Went on to say, quote, "We look forward to the justice system continuing to make sure that everyone else who is responsible for Hutchins' death is required to face the consequences." Now, my friend, there are some other things. There's some other things we found out about this case that we did not know before. Of course, we did not know what the jury would say. But before this terrible incident occurred, most people, well, they had not even heard of a movie called Rust. In fact, it was back in May 2020 that it was announced that Alec Baldwin would produce and star in Rust. This was a Western, actually it was based on a story that he created with writer and director Joel Souza. Now Baldwin, he told The Hollywood Reporter that he was elated to work with Souza after missing on the opportunity to star in Crown Vic. That was back in 2019. He also compared the screenplay to the film Unforgiven in 1992, and he did say, yep, it was inspired by a true story. Now, the movie Rust, it was about something that transpired back in the 1800s in Kansas. It appears there was an aging outlaw by the name of Harlan Rust, and he had come to rescue his 13-year-old grandson, Lucas. Now, hold on to your hat. After Lucas was sentenced to hang for an accidental murder. Boy, isn't that eerie? A little weird, isn't it? This whole movie was about somebody who was being charged and sentenced to hang for an accidental murder. And yet on the set, on this very set, there was yep, you got it, an accidental murder. Now these fugitives, they're on the run. That's right, they're on the run. Harlan Rust and his grandson Lucas are on the run, and they have chasing him. Rust's longtime enemy enters U.S. Marshal Woodhelm. And then, my friend, as I've said before, what Western would not be complete without a bounty hunter? And in a flash, here comes bounty hunter Fenton Preacher Lang. So, it looks like a pretty good little Western story if you're into Westerns. So Baldwin, though, he's the main actor here, and he appeared to be very excited about the opportunity to be a star cowboy. In fact, here's what he said prior to that incident about his role. Listen carefully. When asked about his gunslinging and horse riding skills, well, he said, "They're always at the ready." He said, "I'm an actor from the old school. So if you read my resume, my motorcycle riding, my French juggling, my horseback riding, my gunplay, listen to this, is all right at my fingertips at all time. Hey, hang on to that statement. Gunplay at my fingertips all times. That's vital. The key word, fingertip. You see, you may not know this, particularly if you've not been following the series with Charlie Crimebuster, but Baldwin has emphatically said that he did not pull that trigger of the weapon. Well, we're going to talk about that a little later on down into this program. But there are some more things about this movie that you may not have known. You see, Russ was being produced on a $6 to $7 million budget, and that has been described as a passion project for Baldwin. And as I've told you before, that movie, well, involved around 150 crew members, I believe it was. Yeah, 150. Half of them were local, 22 principal. And they actually had 230 background actors, all from New Mexico. The production, well, the schedule, it was 21 days. That's not a long time, by the way. And that filming began in New Mexico on October the 6th, 2021. Now, keep in mind that while $6 to $7 million is a lot of money to most people, it's really, my friend, a very low budget for a film like this. And it is this low budget that's come into play in this trial of Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. And it will come to play in the coming scheduled trial of Alec Baldwin. That is, unless some deal is struck before the trial. Now, the fact that this is a low-budget film, and producers, Alec Baldwin is part of that leadership team, and they were so-called penny pitching, well, the budget, that could be a very important issue, especially in the coming trial of Baldwin. You have to ask the question, is this the reason they chose Hannah as the armorer instead of going to a more experienced one? We all know this was just like her second big movie that she ever was in that role. And we also know now that Hannah was tasked with doing 2 jobs, including props assistant. She was not given adequate time and training days to do so. That is really despite repeated requests for more safety training that was simply ignored, according to those who are close to this set. In fact, my friend, in the trial, there was a guy by the name of Brian Carpenter. He was a state firearms expert. He testified during Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's involuntary manslaughter trial there in Santa Fe on Thursday, February 29th. He said that in some of the videos, well, they were seeing people were rushing to get done. Even in handling the weapons, there were supposed to be cold guns, which means they should have been checked and, get this, not only checked, but rechecked to assure the safety of others. Here's what Carpenter, this is the expert, this is what he testified. Quote, rushing with firearms and telling someone to rush with firearms is not normal nor accepted. That's what Carpenter testified. He went ahead to say, in a situation like that, when you're getting rushed to that extent, listen to this. He said, that's when safety starts to fall by the wayside. And my friend, in just a moment, I'm going to share with you what I feel was one of the most dramatic parts of this trial that's just completed. And I'm going to share with you about somebody else rather than Baldwin and rather than Reed, who actually took responsibility for this tragic death in this young lady. This young lady who had so much ahead of her. We're going to share that in just a moment. But right now, it's time for us to take time out, to pause a little bit, to relax a little bit. We always share what we call a crazy quick story. Kind of helps lighten the load in some of the dark things that we share. So now, here's Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook Story of the Week. Now, our Crazy Crook Story this week has to do with a kitty cat. That's right, a little kitty cat. Now, according to social platforms, well, kitties, they're quite popular on the web, are they not? Don't you agree with me with that, at least? In fact, I was going to say there are thousands of videos, but I think I'm quite safe to say there are millions of cat videos on social media. Some people I know can literally watch these cat videos all day long, and perhaps even the dog lovers of America can sometimes find themselves watching these little bundles of fur of their perky moments. However, in regards to our Crazy Crook Story of the Week, one of these particular little kitties becomes a part of Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook Story. It actually takes place in all places in Emerald City, and not just Emerald City, but at an Emerald City strip club. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Do not get ahead of me when you're thinking about a strip club and a kitty cat, I should say. Don't think that other thing. It's not perhaps what you thought. You see, what happened is a crazy crook by the name of Everett Ledges. He is one of those crazy crooks, get this, that used 911 as his own personal direct contact with a popo. And because of that, well, Everett, oh, dear old crazy Everett, well, he was arrested outside the Emerald City Strip Club in Murdoch. He was arrested. Now, here's where it gets crazy. He was arrested for repeatedly calling the emergency line 911 to report that the club owner had refused to let his kitty into the jiggle joint. That's what deputies said. So this crazy crook, who called 911 because they would not allow him to take his kitty cat into the strip club, is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's crazy crook of the week. Okay, now back to our main focus. What we know now that we did not know before. Now, in a recent trial, there was someone brought forth on the witness stand in this recent trial. And I got to tell you, folks, I have a whole lot of respect for this guy. Here's a guy who came right out and acknowledged his own failure and his own part in this tragedy. His name, David Halls. David Halls, Halls. He was, by the way, the first assistant director on Rust, and he was, according to others, the person ultimately responsible for safety on the set. By the way, he too was charged, but he pleaded no contest last year to a misdemeanor charge of negligent handling of a weapon. And by the way, he served 6 months of unsupervised probation for that charge. Now, Mr. Halls, he took the stand on Thursday afternoon, and by the way, he kind of painted a little different portrait of the Rust set. He actually said until Hutchins was shot, he believed it was safe. He said that Reed was diligent, seemed confident, and knowledgeable about firearms. He also said she always checked guns with him before they were used in the scenes, just as required by the industry safety protocols. He even defended Baldwin, saying the actor's conduct on the videos, well, didn't raise any safety concerns for him as far as he was concerned. Now, Halls was asked also about 2 accidental discharges of blank rounds that actually occurred a few days before Hutchins' death. That incident, of course, raised concerns for several on the crew, did lead to complaints. And when Halls was asked what he had done about it, he said, "I didn't do anything." And he said, in fact, when Blake's long gun went off, I said, "What the F is going on in there?" He said, "It just went off." You see, Halls, well, he is the one that had been accused of handing Baldwin the Colt 45 just before Hutchins was shot. That, of course, would be a violation of safety rules. You see, the safety rule says only the armorer and the actor are to handle a weapon. Now, on the stand, Halls, well, he denied handing it off, said that Gutierrez-Reed handed that weapon directly to Baldwin. Should be noted that Halls, by the way, gave the same account in the December 2022 deposition that was there in New Mexico for the New Mexico Occupational Safety and Health Bureau. Hollidge, though, has acknowledged, and here's what I like about this guy and what he did. He has acknowledged from the very beginning that he failed to fully check the gun before it was handed to Baldwin. He said he only saw the back of 3 or 4 dummy rounds when Gutierrez-Reed rotated the cylinder for him. So she did rotate the cylinder for him. He failed to catch that live round. So you see, there are some safety issues here, my friend, that's very glaring. The most glaring one is how in the world did a live round get in that weapon? How did she load a live round in there? It should have never happened. Then why didn't Halls find it when he was looking at it? So he's acknowledged now from the beginning that he failed to fully check the gun before it was handed to Baldwin. Now, Halls was also asked in court why he chose to plead to the criminal charge. And here's what I love about him. He said, "I pled to the guilty charge because I was negligent in checking the gun properly." Here he takes full responsibility for his part in this tragic thing. Now, Halls was 3 feet away from Hutchins when the gun went off. He became emotional when he described turning to Hutchins to ask if she was all right. And she said, and he's wiping tears at this time, that she could not feel her legs. When he was asked why he decided to testify, he said he wanted to set the record straight. He said it's important for the truth to be known. It's important for Hutchins' husband and son, her family, to know the truth of what happened. He went on to say it's important also that the cast and crew and producers of Rust knows what happened. Important that the industry knows what happened. And he says that's important so that it might never happen again. And, of course, after the shooting, he retired from the industry. Now, another thing that we know now that we did not know before was that there were allegations that Baldwin, that he was a part of a force to hurry up the production. See another take, Baldwin could be seen lying on his back on the ground while holding a pistol, and he would gesture around with a gun, explaining to the crew how he was going to get up and fire. Now, when Carpenter, the expert that I talked about earlier, was asked if he saw anything wrong with that clip, he said, yeah. He said he's using the weapon as a pointing stick. In fact, at one point in the video, Gutierrez-Reed could be heard off screen warning the crew, everyone in the path of move of the gun, please move. Everybody that's in front of this gun, get out of the way. And Carpenter said, now that it appeared that Gutierrez-Reed was avoiding addressing the issue with this actor Baldwin. He was an A actor. Seems that she was a little intimidated, don't you think? He went on to say she was attempting to not correct Mr. Baldwin, but to try to make the crew move in a more safe position. She should have said to Baldwin, hey man, don't be pointing that weapon around like that. And, of course, her lawyer said that it was pointed out that she was just starting out the business, not even in a union yet. And he was asked, this expert, would it be hard for her to rein in an A-list actor like Baldwin? He said it would be a difficult situation. Carpenter also went on to testify the production should have had 2 armorers. But, unfortunately, Reed was the only armorer, and she was splitting her time between her role as an armorer and her role as a prop assistant. But in the end, the expert rightly testified that once Gutierrez-Reed took on that responsibility, she was indeed responsible. He went on to say, if that's not something you feel you're capable of doing, you should never step into the position of doing it. You have to be prepared to go home. And now we know the jury agrees with that assessment, because she, now, Miss Reed, is awaiting sentencing for her part in this tragic situation. And while she waits, well, the prosecutors, they're going to be going after the famous actor Alec Baldwin. And my friend, he does have some problems. There are reports that came out that our actor was not that keen on paying attention to the safety training that went on while the film was being produced. There are reports that she wanted to spend more time going over the protocols, and Alec was either too busy or already thought he knew more than anybody else knew. There's even a report that in one of the safety briefings, he was spending time on his phone instead of listening to the briefing. That's probably why investigators asked Alec for his phone. Now, my friend, we're going to talk a little more here in a moment, and we're going to get right down to the nitty-gritty of this whole thing. But we try to take time in all of our podcasts to give you some safety training of your own. And we've been doing a series on scam alerts. And boy, James Buckland's been doing an outstanding job on bringing these alerts to our attention. So before we wrap up today's program and share some very important news about things that you know now that you did not know, here is James Buckland with today's scam alert.
Thank you, Charlie Crimebuster. This week we're going to be answering some questions provided by you, our listeners. You've asked questions like, how do we stop scam callers? And what are these scammers doing with my answers to their questions? Well, listeners, here's what the security experts are saying. They say that one reason the scammers are so difficult to stop is that they keep raising their game. They're continually perfecting their scams, taking advantage of tech innovations and honing their methods to better manipulate you, their target. See, scammers have become much more crafty at impersonating legitimate institutions, including creating websites and messages that are carbon copies of legitimate healthcare providers, businesses, and banks, with fewer grammatical mistakes and other red flags for scams. And criminals are not only taking advantage of technological innovations such as artificial intelligence, but they're also growing ever more adept at psychological manipulations, which is their game of persuasion. Aaron Foss, the former chief executive and founder of Nomorobo, a firm whose technology aims to thwart robocalls, explains that today's scammers and overseas call centers, for example, are often trained to minimize their accents and coached on ways to connect emotionally with you, their targets. But here's one specific and very prolific scam, and that's called the voice print scam. That's right, voice print scam. And thanks to technological advances, it's possible for thieves to capture a recording of your voice and then use a software program to generate an imitation deepfake version that can be used to impersonate you. Michael Broomer, the Vice President of Data Breach Resolution and Consumer Protection at Experian, which is a global credit and verification and financial services firm, states that voice print can be used to access your insurance or your financial institution or apply for a driver's license. The New York Times reported on a recent case in which a representative at a major bank received a call from a deepfake copy of a Florida investor's voice requesting that the bank move the man's money elsewhere. Well, fortunately, the fraud attempt was spotted by the bank just before the real estate investor lost his savings. So, how do we stay safe? Well, be cautious when answering calls that appear to be coming from people on your contact list, since the call could be coming from a phone that's been stolen or even had its SIM card cloned. Michael Broomer recommends that one way to prevent your voice from being duplicated is simply don't answer the phone. He also advises that if someone needs to get a hold of you, they can text you. You see, at Charlie Crimebuster, we strive to keep you safe.
Thank you, James, for this good information. Now, my friend, I need to say to you that there are some things that we need to think about as we wrap this up. Number one, what about the sentencing of Hannah Reed? She's going to be sentenced. With that in mind, I've got to tell you, I was not surprised when the jury failed to convict her with tampering of the evidence. See, I think those charges were short-sighted. I believe the prosecutors just wanted to use those charges as a bargaining chip for jurors, thinking no one wants to throw the whole book at Hannah. So let's just take this charge of tampering with the evidence, let them throw that out so the jury will have a better conscience when convicting her of the more significant charges of involuntary manslaughter. Now, in that same token, though, I do believe the judge will hand some jail time to Hannah, because she was the person who was ultimately responsible for allowing a live round to be placed in that chamber, that weapon that was used on the set. Now, I believe that the sentence will be in the small to medium range of sentence. Don't believe she'll get everything. I don't believe she'll get the full sentence. I believe she'll get part of the sentence. And I do believe that there will be heavy probation to be served as well. What do you think about that? I may be wrong, but I do not see her being spared of serving some time in either a jail or prison. I believe she'll serve some time, but I believe it'll be light and moderate, and I believe it'll be heavy on the probation. But now let's talk real quick about the most challenging thing that Baldwin's going to face in the trial on his side. Now, when he was asked about his gun-slinging and horse-riding skills, remember he said, "They're always ready. I'm an actor of the old school. I can do my motorcycle riding, my juggling, my horseback riding, my gunplay," and he said, oh, here it is, "It's all right at my fingertips at all times." Now, hang on to that statement. That's vital. The word fingertip is key word here, because you see, Alec Baldwin, some of you may not know this, but Alec Baldwin has emphatically stated that he did not pull the trigger of the weapon that was discharged and killed film cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. In fact, his own attorney, Baldwin's own attorney, said that his finger was not anywhere near the gun guard when the weapon fired and discharged a live round. Now, this is a very big deal, because what you may not know is that as Baldwin said this, the investigators had the FBI examine the weapon. They had accidental discharge testing, and that testing determined the firearm used in the shooting, which was a .45 Colt caliber Pieta single-action revolver. The test says it could not have fired without the trigger being pulled. Wow, that's what the FBI report says. With the hammer in a 1.25 cocked positions, the gun could not be made to fire without pulling the trigger. With the hammer fully cocked, the gun could not be made to fire without a pull of the trigger, while the working internal components was intact and functional. And those components, my friend, were intact and functional. Now, my friend, the jury may use that information to convict Alec Baldwin. But on the other hand, when the weapon was handed to him, it was declared a cold gun, meaning safe. That was someone else's responsibility. But the two things, the fact that he lied about having his fingers on the trigger, and the fact that he was actually pointing the weapon at someone and had been doing that in the course of the filming, actually using the weapon as a pointer, well, those two things, it just may sway the jury to convict Alec Baldwin as well. Hey, my friend, what say ye? What do you say about it? It will be interesting to be sure if this thing goes to trial. Now, in July, there's a schedule to pick a jury. We're going to see if it goes that far. So what say ye? Give me a shout-out. You reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. But before we leave today, I just got to take a moment. Hang in here with me. I got to say to you that are gun owners, and that includes me, to be a responsible gun owner, we must remember to be responsible. Remember what you have been taught in gun safety. Never point a weapon at someone unless you intend to use it. Never take for granted that a weapon is not loaded with a live round. Always check and recheck. You see, firearm owners, we can all make our homes safer through secure firearm storage practices. Unfortunately, a lot of people choose to leave their firearms unlocked, allowing children, persons at risk, to access them. In fact, get this now, an estimated 4.6 million children live in households with at least one firearm that is loaded and unlocked. And easy access to these unsecured firearms, well, they increase the risk of an unintentional injury and death by that firearm. In fact, statistics says every 6 days, a child under the age of 10 is killed by an unintentional shooting. Wow, that's heavy stuff. So if you have a weapon, if you're a gun owner, be a responsible gun owner. That's our lesson of today. So until this time, next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster thanking you for being aboard the Charlie Crime train and saying, as we always say, be alert, be safe. For life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. If you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.